Hey, all you cool cats and kittens. Today, we're going to be talking about Chapter 14, which is the foot and toes. So this is going to be pretty quick here because there's not a whole heck of a lot that's going to be really different than from the foot and ankle that we just talked about. When we talk about the foot and toes, there is a ton of different small muscles, ligaments, structures, and they're all really, important, but we don't really need to know a whole lot of them. When we talk about, say, like the wrist and the hand, you have carpal bones. Your carpal bones make up your wrist. When you have your foot, you have tarsal bones. In the hand, you have the hand bones you have are called your metacarpal bones. The bones you have in your midfoot are called your metatarsal bones. And then just as your fingers are called digits or phalanges, so are your toes called digits or phalanges. Now, a couple of the things we'll see here really with the foot are mostly all just kind of annoying or nagging injuries. There's not a whole lot of terrible stuff that's going to happen to you here. First one here is an arch strain. So like I've showed you before, I really don't have that much of an arch. So if we look at my foot here, you'll see that, let's position this down, whoops, just a little bit, there we go. But you see how I have really very, very little of an arch. So right there, you would call that flat feet. If I had my arch elevated really high, and I mean, I can't even make myself do that, but that would be a high arch. So remember, high arches, you tend to have more of a pronated foot. Low arches, you tend to have, high arches, you have more of a supinated foot. Low arches, you tend to have more of a pronated foot. The biggest thing that will happen with an arch strain is just pretty much foot pain and soreness. This is pretty much exclusive to having overuse of your foot. So typically like walking or standing on your feet for too long. Not a whole lot you do for this other than really just like rest, but supportive inserts can definitely help for that, especially in the long term. Now, plantar fasciitis, if you ever had this, you know it's not fun. It's not going to kill you, but at the same time, it may not make life all that enjoyable. So itis, inflammation, plantar, meaning the bottom of your foot, fascia, referring to the fascia. So plantar fasciitis is inflammation of the fascia on the bottom of your foot. Typically, you're going to get pain just in front of the heel, but you can get it anywhere really along the bottom of the foot. You can be affected by plantar fasciitis. The heel is the most common area, but this is one of those things where it gets inflamed and then it heals, and then it gets inflamed and then heals. So this is very annoying to treat because you have to step on your foot with every step you take. So immobilizing or taking a lot of the weight off of it can really help, but it doesn't necessarily fix the underlying problem. So plantar fasciitis can be one of these nagging injuries that comes back over and over again. And really, it's going to be about finding something that works for you. I had this when I was actually a freshman in college, and it affected my back right heel. And I found that putting a lot of pressure on it, so I wore like a foam almost pad in my shoe, and that helped to actually take a lot of the, at least my perceived strain off my foot. So having a lot of padding under there actually helped me. Other people report that if they take, like, say, the stress off their foot, so they are, like, say, non-weight bearing, or they don't step on it, that actually helps them more. So various recovery processes here. It can progress into something a little more serious where you actually get almost complete foot pain. That's where you would need to have potentially a plantar fasciotomy, where, similar to compartment syndrome, a surgeon would go in and would actually cut kind of down the middle of your foot to release a lot of the pressure that's built up on there. But that's usually a last ditch effort for you there. If you have a bone injury, very, very common to have a fracture in the foot, usually these are stress fractures. So the majority of the time, you're going to get a fracture in the first or fifth metatarsal. Here's your first, here's your fifth. And usually these are going to be caused from having a misstep, or if you get, crushed, like something drops on there. You can also get your toes to fracture from stubbing them. That's also pretty common. And then really repetitive running can potentially put a strain on there, or you can get a fracture from that. For the most part, you usually don't get a whole lot of surgical intervention unless it's a non-union fracture. And again, non-union means the bones are sticking apart and they're not going to come back together naturally. Now, if you have a muscular ligamentous injury into the foot, it's really from usually a repetitive movement, like especially if you're a soccer player kicking a ball repetitively, if you're a football kicker kicking the ball, or if you don't have the correct footwear and you keep running. That's usually the big problems there you'll see. Other common things you'll see: blisters, calluses and corns, ingrown toenails. So if you have a blister, that's just caused by friction between your foot and like either the ground or the surface of your shoe, something like that. Ingrown toenails here, that's caused when the toe actually grows into the skin as opposed to staying out and away from it. If you have a callus or a corn, this is only going to occur on hairless surfaces. You cannot get a callus on something that has hair, and you cannot get a callus on something that's bumpy. That's why, like say the joint in your fingers, that will never get calloused because it's bumpy. So a smooth surface though, like say the palm of your hand, the heel of your foot, those can get calluses by repetitive overuse or repetitive frictional forces on them. A corn is right here. That is where you get friction from your toe onto your shoe. So you're getting repetitive friction against there and it forms a corn, which is just almost like a kind of like a callus, but on your toe. Now, orthotics are used to help correct a lot of, like, say, your foot issues associated with having flat feet or a high arch. Those are pretty self-explanatory. Now, if you have a foot drop means that you have damage to your tibialis anterior muscle. So you're the muscle in the front of your shin, meaning that you can't lift your foot up. It drops down. Your toes constantly point down. What you do is you wear what's called a foot or a heel lift. By putting this here, and this would actually extend closer down there, it forces your toes to stay up. You use this not so much to correct the problem, but to make sure that you're able to take a step without your toes hitting the ground. Heel bruises, those are just really from impact there. Usually that's from, like, say, landing on your heel. If you look here, this is a horse hoof, and this is the reason why you would have horses always should have their hooves shoed. So you should always have a horseshoe on there because they can actually bruise their heels or bruise what would be the hoof there if they don't have a horseshoe on, which you see there's no shoe here. So that actually is a very risky thing for them if they don't have a shoe on there. Dislocations there, really the subtalar joint's the only one that would dislocate. You could get an ankle dislocation, but again, that's still rare. But true foot dislocations, this is something that's really rare. And then last thing here is bunions. Now, bunions really aren't an injury, but it's a pathological condition. Usually these aren't going to happen until later in life. However, they do have a prevalence in like teens to young adults. It's a lot smaller, but what happens here is you get a bone growth on the outside of your great toe, and it shifts your big toe over so it interferes with the rest of your toes. This can cause like some of the toes to have to go over top or underneath it, or it can cause a shift over with the rest of the toes like you see here. You have to have surgery for this. So what will happen is a surgeon will go in and they will shave off that excessive bone growth, put a plate in there to hold you in place, so it'll force that toe to stay forward. Then all these will shift back over. Usually about a 6 to 8 week recovery time, but again, it is something that you have to have surgery for because you have to cut off that actual bone growth there to make that heal. So that is everything there for the foot and toes. So pretty basic here. Not a whole lot you're going to see really on the the athletic field happening here outside of maybe like the sprain, strains, plantar fasciitis, but it's still good to know that. So until next time, that is everything there, and I will see you all later.